Shalom, shalom, Mashpaka. We're now back for part 2, talking about a woman's covering. Talking about a woman's covering. What does it mean for a woman to be covered? And Abba wants to make the point that a woman, she must be covered. She must be covered. And what does that covering look like? And she must be covered from cradle to grave. It is Yahuwah's desire for a woman to be covered from cradle to grave. She must be covered by her husband from cradle to grave. She must be covered. She must be covered from cradle to grave. This is right ruling. This is in connection with the judgment that was pronounced in Genesis 3rd chapter, the 16th verse. That in pain she shall bear children. Her desire should be for her husband. In pain she shall bear children. And he shall what? He shall rule over her. He shall rule over her. And so it is by design that a woman is to be covered from cradle to grave. From cradle to grave. He is to be covered. She is to be covered from cradle to grave. Looking here now, starting part 2. Looking at Deuteronomy chapter 22. And I'm going to read verses 5. Then I'm going to read verses 13 through 21. And then verses 28 through 29. And then verses 28 through 29. Beginning at verse 5. A woman does not wear that which pertains to a man. Indeed, we have our roles. We have our roles. Why does she? And I read this for a reason. The reason that a woman does not wear that which pertains to a man, because we have separate roles. A woman is not to operate in the role of a man. And a man is not to operate in a role of a woman, as it reads here, nor does a man put on a woman's garment. For whoever does this is an abomination to Yahuwah your Elohim. And so this is put in place because there are roles. There are roles. The woman is to submit in accordance with Genesis 3:16 because of the fall. Because of the fall, we're no longer co-equally. We're no longer co-rulers. Now, man is to rule over woman, over Aisha. Aisha is to rule over her until they both go to the ground. And man is to work the soil with his hands until he goes to the ground. This is the judgment. This is the judgment, and it must be respected, and we must obey the judgment if we expect to gain eternal life. If we expect to gain eternal life. Reading on, when any man takes a wife and shall go into her, and shall hate her, and shall make abusive charges against her, and bring an evil name on her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I did not find her a maiden. Then the father and mother of the young woman shall take and bring out the proof of the girl's maidenhood to the elders of the city at the gate. And this is the sheet. They take the sheets, which should contain blood, because when the hymen is broken, if she's a virgin, when the hymen is broken, she bleeds. She bleeds. And thus this is the proof that she was a virgin. And the girl's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as a wife. I gave my daughter to this man as a wife, and he hates her. And see, he has made abusive charges against her, saying, I did not find your daughter a maiden. And yet these are the proofs of my daughter's maidenhood. And they shall spread the garment before the elders of the city. And the elders of the city shall take that man and punish him, and fine him 100 pieces of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought an evil name on a maiden, on an alma, on a virgin of Yasha'al. Why to the father? Because a woman is to be covered from cradle to grave. She is to be covered by her father until a suitable Aish comes along. Then he is to cover her. He is to cover her. So she is to be covered. She is to be covered, but we're still talking about what does that mean? What does it mean for a woman to be covered? What does it mean for her to be covered? But she is to be covered from cradle to grave. This is right ruling in accordance with Genesis 3:16. This is right ruling. And she is to be his wife. He is not allowed to put her away all his days. But if the matter is true, that the girl was not found a maiden, then they shall bring out the girl to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done wickedness in Yasharal, to whore in her father's house. Thus you shall purge this evil, this wickedness from your midst. When a man finds a girl who is a maiden, who is not engaged, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lay with her shall give the girl's father 50 pieces of silver. Again, give the girl's father 50 pieces of silver, because she is to be covered from cradle to grave. She is to be covered by her father until a suitable Aish comes along to cover her. Thus, he gives the silver to the father. Thus, then, he becomes her covering. He gives the bride's price. He purchases her. He purchases the woman from the father, and thus he becomes her covering. Yes, he does. This is a proper Aber'it marriage. There must be a bride's price paid. Yahusha paid a bride's price for us, but he didn't pay for us in perishable things like silver and gold. He paid for us with his very own blood. So there must be a bride's price. What has been established by him, we must follow. We don't follow the ways of the world. We follow the ways of the text. What Yahuwah does, we do. He paid a bride's price for us. He purchased us. We became his property. We became his possession. In the same way, an Aish purchases an Aisha. She then becomes his servant. She becomes his possession. He begins to rule over her in accordance with Genesis 3:16. This is right ruling. This is the judgment which shall be in place until Shamayim and Aratz passes away. And so he purchased the girl from her father for 50 pieces of silver. And then he becomes her covering. And she is to be his wife because he has humbled her. He is not allowed to put her away all his days. Cradle to grave. She is to be covered. A woman is to be covered. A woman is to be covered cradle to grave. This is why, never mind, I'm not going to read that. But a woman is to be covered cradle to grave. Cradle to grave. Barak Yahuwah. Reading here now in Shamut, or Exodus chapter 22, verses 16 through 17, and then verses 22 through 24. Now, what about women who are not married, who are part of an assembly? The assembly is your covering, especially the elders in that assembly. They are to cover her. They are to cover her. They are to cover her. She, if a woman is part of an assembly, she should come to those elders or that elder for right ruling before she makes any decisions. The same as a woman coming to her husband. That woman should go to the elders of that assembly before making a decision. She is to be covered from cradle to grave. This is right ruling. Don't get mad at me. This is the text. This is right ruling. This is right ruling. This is why we are to take care of the widows. Yes, we are. This is why we're to take care of the widows. But when we, and I didn't read that, when we found the story of Ruth, when she was found by Boaz, she was found working and gleaning in the fields. She was found working, but I draw your attention to, these were Boaz's field, and he did not have to allow her to glean in his fields, but he allowed her to glean in his field, to work in his field, and thus providing food and sustenance for her. You see, this is right ruling. This is right ruling. He should, he didn't have to, but in accordance with Torah, he should have. In accordance with Torah, he was supposed to. In accordance with Torah, he was supposed to let the stranger glean in his field. He was supposed to let the stranger glean in his field, but he did not have to allow her to glean with his maidens, to glean with the other women, to glean the best of the harvest. He did not have to allow her to do that. He did not have to allow her to do that. And so we see in the example of Ruth that women, even single women, are to be covered. They're to be covered. Even single women are to be covered. If you're not in your father's house, you should. If you're single, you should still be in your father's house. You should still be in your father's house. But if you are no longer part of your father's house and part of an assembly, you still need to be covered. You're still to be covered because a woman is to be covered from cradle to grave. Let's look at Shemut, or Exodus chapter 22, verse 16 through 17, and then reading verse 22 and 24. And when a man entices a maiden who is not engaged and lies with her, he shall certainly pay the bride's price for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, if her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he pays according to the bride's price of maidens, 50 pieces of silver. 50 pieces of silver. And so cradle to grave is a woman to be covered until she is purchased, until a bride's price is paid, until she is purchased. She's to be covered by her father until her husband comes along to purchase her, and then he becomes her covering. If you're familiar with the forgotten books of Adam and Kua, Adam paid a bride's price for Kua. Yes, he did. He paid a bride's price for Kua. He purchased her in order to cover her. In order to cover her. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Do not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you do afflict them at all, if they cry out to me at all, I shall certainly hear their cry, and my wrath shall burn, and I shall kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless, and your children fatherless. Barak Yahuwah. Barak Yahuwah. Reading here now in Uikra, Leviticus chapter 22, verse 12 and 13. And when a Kahanim, and when a priest's daughter is married to a stranger, she does not eat of the Kadush offerings. She does not eat of the Kadush offerings because now she's out of her father's house and she's married to someone. She's married to a stranger. Here in particular, she's married to a Zor, which means someone who is profane, someone who is unclean, someone who is unclean. But when a priest's daughter, a Kahanim's daughter, is a widow or put away and has no child and has returned to her father's house, as in her youth, she does eat of her father's food, but no stranger, no Zur, no one unclean eats of it. A woman is to be covered from cradle to grave. This is right ruling. Genesis 3:16. This is right ruling. We're still talking about a woman's covering. Some are still talking, have their mind on a head covering because of the picture. We're going to cover that. Abba's going to cover that. And so a woman is to be covered from cradle to grave. A woman cannot even enter into an oath without her covering's consent. She cannot even enter into an oath without her covering's consent. This is right ruling. This is accordance with the judgment that was pronounced in the very beginning. Genesis 3:16 through 19. This is in accordance with the judgment that was pronounced. Numbers, the 30th chapter, verses 1 through 16. And Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes concerning the children of YAHUAH'S, saying, this is the word which Yahuwah has commanded. When a man vows a vow to Yahuwah, or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he does not break his word. He does according to all that comes out of his mouth. Listen, or if a woman vows a vow to Yahuwah, and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow, and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father has kept silent towards her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself stands. But if her father forbids her on the day that he hears, then none of her vows, nor her agreements by which she has bound herself stand. And Yahuwah pardons her, because her father has forbidden her. She is to be covered from cradle to grave. She is to be covered. This is right ruling. We're talking about a woman's covering. But if she at all belongs to a husband, she becomes his property, his possession when he purchases her with a bride's price, the same way in which we have become the possession of our husband because he has purchased us. But if she at all belongs to a husband, while bound by her vows or by a rash utterance from her lips by which she bound herself, and her husband hears it, and he has kept silent towards her on the day that she hears, then her vows shall stand, and her agreements by which she bound herself do stand. But if her husband forbids her on the day that he hears it, then he has nullified her vow which she had vowed, and the rash utterance of her lips by which she bound herself. And Yahuwah pardons her. Cradle to grave, she is to be covered. She is to have a covering. But any vow of a widow or a divorced woman by which she has bound herself stands against her. And this is why, again, as I read in Jubilees, I believe it was the 2nd or 3rd chapter, where it read that the Torah was given to Adam, just like the Torah was given to Masha. It was given to a man. It wasn't given to a woman. It wasn't given to a woman. A woman, if you are divorced or a widow and you are part of an assembly, you should seek the counsel of an elder. You should seek the counsel of an elder before entering into a vow. This is right ruling. Yes, you do. You should seek the counsel of an elder before entering into a vow. And she vowed in her, and if she vowed in her husband's house, or bound herself by an agreement with an oath, and her husband heard it, and has kept silent towards her, and did not forbid her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement by which she had bound herself stands. But if her husband clearly nullified them on the day, he heard them, then whatever came from her lips concerning her vows or concerning the agreement binding her, it does not stand. Her husband has nullified them, and Yahuwah pardons her. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict her being, let her husband confirm it, or let her husband nullify it. Cradle to grave. Cradle to grave, a woman is to be covered. But if her husband is altogether silent at her from day to day, then he confirms all her vows or all the agreements that bind her. If he confirms them because he kept silent towards her on the day that he heard, but if he nullifies them after he has heard, then he shall bear her crookedness. These are the laws which Yahuwah commanded Masha between a man and his wife, and between a father and his daughter in her youth, in her father's house. They are to be covered from cradle to grave. Woman, you are to be covered from cradle to grave. This is right ruling in accordance with Genesis 3:16, where you shall bear children in pain, and your husband does rule over you. If your husband is not ruling over you, then your father is ruling over you. You are to be covered from cradle to grave. If your husband or your father is not ruling over you, then the elder of the assembly is to rule. And you are to submit to his authority. You are to submit to the authority of the elder. And you're to go to him before pronouncing a vow. Before pronouncing or entering into a vow. Let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 1 through 16. Do not rebuke an older man, but appeal to him as a father, younger ones as brothers, elderly women as mothers, younger ones as sisters, in all cleanliness. Respect widows who are truly widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to treat their own house as reverently and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before Elohim. And she who is truly a widow and left alone trusts in Elohim and continues in petitions and prayers night and day. But she who is living in luxury is dead while she lives. And this speaks to taking care of widows, taking care of and covering widows and taking care of them, providing their covering, providing their food, providing their shelter. This speaks to covering widows. This speaks to covering widows. Indeed, I'm reading this to show that women are to be covered from cradle to grave. Cradle to grave. Younger women, they're to what? They're to seek husbands. Younger women are to seek husbands. Yes, they are. And if they are not married and single, then they are to work. They are to work. They are to work. But they are still to seek the covering of an elder with respect to spiritual matters. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And command these matters in order for them to be blameless. And if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he is denied the belief and is worse than an unbeliever. Do not enroll in widow unless she is over 60 years of age, having been the wife of one man, who reported for good works, of one man well reported for good works, if she has brought up children. If she has brought up children. Yeah, you're listening. He's mentioning this. If she has brought up children. Why is he mentioning if she has brought up children? We're going to get to that. If she has lodged strangers. If she has washed the feet of the Kadush ones. If she has assisted the afflicted. If she has closely followed every good work, but refused the younger widows, for then they become headstrong against the Mashiach. They desire to marry, having guilt because they set aside their first belief. Moreover, they learn to be idle, going about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, speaking what is improper. So I resolve that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, giving no occasion to the adversary for rivaling. For already some have turned aside after Satan. If any believing man or woman has widows, let such assist them, and do not let the assembly be burdened in order to assist those who are truly widows. Let's look at 1 Timothy, Timothy's Aleph, the 2nd chapter, verse 9 through 15. Likewise, that the women dress themselves becomingly with decency and sensibleness, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly garments, but with good works, which is becoming for women undertaking worship of Elohim. Let a woman learn in silence. Let a woman learn in silence, in all subjection, in all submission. You see, this is what it means when a husband rules over you. It means that you are to what? Subject yourselves to his rule. You are to subject yourself to his rule. Even all women are to subject themselves. To subject themselves. It says here, let a woman, not a wife, let a woman learn in silence, in all subjection, in all humility, in all subjection. But I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. This is right ruling in accordance with Genesis 3:16. This is the judgment. This is the judgment. Shall all here speaking in accordance with Torah, rather to be in silence. Because Adam was formed first, then Kua, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman, having been deceived, fell into transgression. But she shall be delivered in childbearing if they continue in belief and love and separateness and sensibleness. Why? Through childbearing. Because this is the judgment. This is the judgment that was pronounced. Your desire shall be for your husband, and in pain shall thou bear children, and he shall rule over you. This is the judgment. If you submit to the judgment, it says here, you shall be delivered. You shall enter into eternal life. So it behooves you, woman, to submit to the judgment that is going to be in place until Shamayim and Aratz passes away. Reading this again. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman, having been deceived, fell into transgression. But she shall be saved. She shall be delivered in childbearing, because that's the judgment. That's the judgment. If they continue in belief and love and separateness with sensibleness. And so through childbearing, women are going to be saved, delivered. This is the judgment for Kua's crime. This is the judgment for Kua's crime. It must be carried out. Moreover, man is to rule over her. Man is to rule over her. This is also part of the judgment that must be carried out to completion. It must be carried out to completion. Likewise, men are to work. Men are to work. This is the judgment that must be carried out. That must be carried out. Now let's look at 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, that talks about head covering. We're still talking about a woman's covering. We're still talking about a woman's covering. Let's look at 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, verse 1 through 16. Beginning at verse 1. Become imitators of me, as I also am of Mashiach. And I praise you, brothers, that you remember me in every way and keep the traditions as I delivered them to you. And I wish you to know that the head of every man is Mashiach, and the head of woman is man, and the head of Mashiach is Elohim. I'm going to address this below. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered. And this is why I wore this. This is why I wore this hat. I wore it to prove a point. Listen, every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, brings shame. Here's that word shame again. If you watch part 1, Abba spoke about shame. Abba spoke about shame. Shame is what? Shame is nakedness. Shame is nakedness. And so when Adam and Kua's shame was exposed because they transgressed Torah, what happened? Yahuwah covered their shame. Yahuwah covered their shame. Listen here. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, does what? Brings shame to his head. Brings shame to his head. And every woman praying or prophesying with her head uncovered brings shame to her head. Brings shame to her head. For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaved, this implies nakedness, does it not? Yes, it does, because nakedness is shame, and a shaven head is naked. It is naked, and it is shameful. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But if it is shameful, if it is a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. Let her be covered. For a man indeed should not cover his head, since he is the likeness, listen, since he is the likeness and esteem of Elohim. But woman is the esteem of man. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. For man also was not created for the woman, but woman for the man. Because of this, the woman ought to have authority on her head because of the messengers. Because of the messengers. Why does he mention this here? Why does Sha'al speak this? Because of the messengers. Because there's still fallen messengers around. The 200 messengers that left their estate and came down, the 200 watchers that left their estate and came down and slept with human women, they're locked up now for 70 generations. But there were a third of messengers that fell with Hashatan, that are still fallen messengers, Naphalim, that are still fallen messengers. And so because of them, a woman ought to have authority on her head. If you remember what happened before the flood, when they came down and took women, all of who they wanted, they took them by force. Yes, they did. They took them by force. But they have no right to a woman who is covered. They have no right to a woman that's covered. And so here, a woman ought to have, a married woman ought to have a covering over her head. Even if you're single and married to the HaMashiach, you ought to have a covering on your head. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. Because of the woman, because of this, the woman ought to have authority over her head because of the messengers. Because of the messengers. This should cause alarm. This should cause alarm. We're going to talk more about this covering. We're going to talk about more of this covering. We're still talking about shame. We're still talking about a woman's covering. We're still talking about a husband. We're still talking about all of this. All of this is intertwined. All of this nakedness, shame, husband, coverings. All of this is intertwined. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. But woman, for the man, because of this, woman ought to have authority on her head because of the messengers. Because of the messengers. However, man is not independent of woman. No woman independent of man in the master. For as the woman was from the man, even as the man, even so, the man also is through the woman. But all are from Elohim. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to Elohim with her head uncovered? To pray to Elohim with her head uncovered? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man indeed has long hair, it is a disrespect to him? And if a man has long hair, it is esteemed to her. And if a woman has long hair, it is an esteem to her, because the long hair has been given to her over against a veil, over against a veil. If however anyone seems to be contentious, we do not have such a habit, nor do the assemblies of Elohim. Nor do the assemblies of Elohim. I'm going to address that. I'm going to address this in just a moment, because I want to show you some Greek. I want to show you some Greek with respect to that covering. I want to show you some Greek with respect to that covering. But before I show you the Greek and read that, turn to 2 Samuel, the 15th chapter, and I'm only going to read the 30th verse. Shamuel Bat, 2 Samuel, the 15th chapter, the 30th verse. Reading here, it says, "And Daud went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered. And he had his head covered." And this word is kafah. 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 This is where the Jewish people get that word kafah. They call it a kefah. It's not a kefah, it's kafah. He had his head covered, kafah, and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. And so we look at this word kafah, and it is Strong's number Hebrew 2645. 2645. What does it mean? It means to cover, by implication, to veil. To veil. To encase, protect, seal, cover, overlay. To veil. To veil. I read this for a reason. To veil. You understand what a veil is? A veil is something that covers the face. To veil. This is what Malak Daud had. He had on a veil. This is what a kafah is. So now let's look at Corinthians. Corinthians Malaf, or 1 Corinthians 11th chapter. And I'm going to read verse 4 through 7 again. And we're going to look at the Greek here to gain a better context and a better understanding of what is being said here. "Every man praying or prophesying having his head uncovered brings shame." Brings shame. And we understand, reading, going back to the first video, nakedness is shame. Nakedness is shameful. Nakedness is shame. And Abba Yahuwah, when our parents, Adam and Kuah, when their nakedness was exposed, he did what? As a husband, he covered their shame. He covered their shame. It brings shame. Every man praying or prophesying having his head covered brings shame to his head. And every woman praying or prophesying with her head uncovered brings shame to her head. For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is a shame for women to be shorn or shaved, having her head naked, let her be covered. Let her be covered. For a man indeed should not cover his head, since he is the likeness and esteem of Elohim, but woman is the esteem of man. Now let's look at cover. Let's look at the Greek word for cover. It is the Greek kata kalupto. Kata kalupto. And it is Greek Strong's 2619. 2619. It is the Greek Strong's kata kalupto. Let's find out what it means. Let's find out what it means. It means to veil, to cover the head, to cover the head, veil, cover the head, to cover the head. Now, the head is everything from the crown of the head to where the neck begins, to where the neck begins. This is the head. This is the head. So to veil the head, to veil the head, to cover the image of Yahuwah. This is our face, which is part of the head. To veil the head, which is the image of Yahuwah, is shameful for a man to do, because man is created in the image of Yahuwah. And so we don't cover his image. We don't cover his face. Has nothing to do with a hat. Has nothing to do with a hat. We're talking about a veil. akin to Arabs wearing a veil, akin to Arabs wearing a veil in the desert. We don't veil our faces. We don't veil our faces. We don't do this because it is shameful for us to cover the image of the one in whom we have been created in the image of. So reading on, it means to veil, cover the head, to veil, cover the head, to cover the head. It means here to wear a veil, to wear a veil. This is what the Greek kata kalipto means, to wear a veil, to wear a veil. It does not mean to wear a hat or to cover or a cover. It means to wear a veil. If it were improper or shameful for us to wear veils or to wear hats, then the priest, the Kahan, who wore a turban in the very presence of Yahuwah could not have done so. He could not have done so. It would have been shameful. He went in the very presence of Yahuwah beyond the veil, wearing a turban, wearing a linen turban. And so if it were forbidden for us to wear hats or coverings, they could not have gone into the very presence of Yahuwah wearing a turban. This speaks to a veil. This speaks to a veil, and Shaul gives the context of it when he says that it is shameful for us to veil ourselves because we are made in the image of Yah. We are made in the image of Yahuwah, and woman is made in the image of man. Yes, they are. And yes, we are. And so it is shameful for us to cover our faces, to cover our faces. And so this is what that word kalipto is alluding to both men and women, Now, woman should cover her hair, because of the messengers, because hair is alluring. Hair is alluring. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So you should cover your hair. You should cover your hair because of the messengers, because it is alluring. Those 200 messengers were what? They were attracted to those women. They lusted after those women, and they came down and seized by force all that they wanted. And they laid with them and bore children, and the women bore children from them. Great giants. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And so a woman should cover her hair. But this word here, katakaliptu, means to veil. Means to veil. And Shaul declares that a woman should what? Should veil her face when praying and prophesying. When praying and prophesying. Why? Why should a woman veil her face when praying or prophesying? Because of the crime of Kuah. Because when Kuah disobeyed her head, whose image she was created in, she was created in the image of man. When she obeyed Hashatan, instead of obeying her husband, the one whose image she was created in, she brought shame to her head. She brought shame to her head. And so now, when praying, and so ultimately, she's also created in the image of Yahuwah, because if she is created in the image of man, she's also created in the image of Yahuwah, because man is created in the image of Yahuwah. And so she brought shame to him. She brought shame to him. She brought shame to her head. And so now, when coming into his presence, when praying or prophesying, she must what? She must cover her shame. She must cover her shame. She must cover her face. She must veil her face, because she dishonored the image of who she is created in. She dishonored the image of the one in whom she is created in the image of. If that makes sense. I'm getting tongue-tied. So she must cover her shame. She must cover her shame. And this is also symbolic of the husband covering the nakedness and covering the shame of his wife, covering that crime, the crime of Kuah, the crime of our mother Kuah. When you're married, the man covers your shame, the same as Yahuwah. When Adam and Kuah committed crime, as husband, he came in and covered their shame, covered their nakedness. And so when a woman is joined to her husband, he then covers her crime. He covers her nakedness. Yes, love covers a multitude of crime. Love covers a multitude of crime. And so while she should wear a covering when just in ordinary works to cover her hair because it's very alluring because of the messengers, but when coming in the presence of Yahuwah, when praying or prophesying, she is to cover her shame. She is to cover her shame because she dishonored the image in whom she is created after. She dishonored the image in who she is created after. So she must cover that shame. She must cover her nakedness now. She must cover her shame when coming into his presence. And she must wear this. She must wear this as being symbolic of her shame being covered, of her nakedness being covered, of her husband covering her shame. Yes, woman. Yes, Aisha. You are to wear it. Because if you don't, you bring shame to your husband. You bring shame to your head. So you are to wear this veil when praying and prophesying, and you should cover your hair because of the messengers. Because of the messengers, you must cover your nakedness. And this judgment will be in place. The covering of your shame, the covering of your shame, this judgment will be in place until Shamayim and Aratz passes away. Passes away. Let's look at Bereshit, Genesis chapter 24, verse 64 through 67. And Rebekah lifted her eyes, and when she saw Ishkak, she dismounted from the camel. And she had said to the servant, who is this man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, this is my master. So listen. So she took a veil and covered herself. Out of respect for her covering, out of respect for her head, out of respect for her covering, she took a veil and covered herself. Now, this is not to say that a woman is to wear a veil at all times. She is to wear a veil when praying or prophesying to cover her shame, because you dishonored the image, Yahuwah, in whom you were created after. You dishonored him when you obeyed Hashatan. Kua dishonored him. Kua dishonored him. And so from now until Shamayim and Aratz passes away, when you go in to pray and prophesy, or you are praying or prophesying, you must wear a veil. You must wear a veil. This is what kalipto means. It means to veil. And men are not to wear a veil because we are created in the image of Yahuwah. But we are to wear a beard. We are to wear a beard. Beards cover our shame. Beards cover our shame. This is why we're not to shave our beards. This is why we're to wear beards, because beard covers the shame of men, as a veil covers the shame of women when they go in to pray and prophesy. But it says here, and the servant said, it is my master. She took a veil. So she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Ishkak and all the matters he had done. And Ishkak brought her into his mother's Sharash tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Ishkak was comforted after his mother's death. Let's look at Shamut, Exodus, the 34th chapter. And I'm going to read verse 30 through 35. And Aharon and all the children of Yasha'al looked at Masha and saw the skin of his face shone. The skin of his face shone. His face, who is the image of Yahuwah. His face shone. And they were afraid to come near him. But Masha called out to them, and Aharon and all the rulers of the congregation or assembly returned to him. And Masha spoke to them. And afterwards all the children of Yasha'al came near. And he commanded them all that Yahuwah had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. And when Masha ended speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Masha, are you listening? He put a veil on his face. He put a veil on his face because his face shone. But whenever Masha went in before Yahuwah to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. Why? Because it's shameful for a man to cover his face, which is made in the image of Yahuwah. This is what Shaul is talking about, a veil. He's not talking about a hat. He's talking about a veil. And how a woman is to wear a veil to cover her shame, which is symbolic of a husband covering her nakedness, covering her shame, covering her shame. Indeed, a man's covering over a woman is symbolic of him covering her shame. Covering her shame. This is why she must be covered. This is why she must be covered by a covering, to cover her shame, to cover her nakedness, to cover her nakedness. And so when she comes into the presence of Yahuwah, either praying or prophesying, she must veil her face to cover her shame, to cover her shame. But whenever Masha went in before to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out to speak to the children of Yasha'al, what he had been commanded, and the children of Yasha'al would see the face of Masha, that the skin of Masha's face shone, and Masha would put the veil on his face again until he went in to speak with him. Until he went in to speak with him. And so again, the head is everything from the crown of the head to the point where the neck begins. Sha'al is talking about completely covering the head, or wearing a veil akin to an Arab. When a man veils his head, he brings dishonor to his head. He covers the face that is created in the image of Yahuwah. This is why Masha removed the veil when he went in to the presence of Yahuwah. Moreover, this is why Rebekah veiled herself. She was honoring her head. When a woman wears a veil or a head covering when praying or nabuah or prophesying, she is covering her shame. She is covering her nakedness. She's covering her nakedness because she shamed her head. She shamed her head when Kua obeyed Hashatan and not her head. And not her head. And so when Yahuwah created man in his image, male and female, he created them. Both were created in his image. When Kua committed crime, when she committed crime, she dishonored her head. Thus, she is to cover her shame. She is to cover her shame when she is praying or nabuah or prophesying. And this indeed again is symbolic of her being covered, of her shame being covered, of her having an Aish, a husband, to cover her shame, to cover her nakedness. And so a woman's covering is intended to cover her shame, to cover her nakedness. The shame of Kua, she partook of the fruit first, and she was the first to understand that she was naked. She was the first to understand her shame. She was the first. Adam didn't know his shame before Kua gave him the fruit. Kua partook of the fruit first, and her shame was revealed first. She was the first to dishonor the head. And so now she is to be covered. She is to be covered from cradle to grave. Her shame, her nakedness is to be covered from cradle to grave. She is to bear children in pain. And her desire is to be for her husband, and he does rule over her. He does cover her shame. He does cover her shame. He does cover her shame. This is the judgment. This is the judgment that a woman is to have her shame covered. She is to have her nakedness covered. She is to have her nakedness covered from cradle to grave. And even when going in to pray or prophesy, she must veil her face. She must veil the image of which she dishonored. And she should wear a covering, a head covering at all times to cover her hair when outside because of the messengers. Reading now, Yeshayahu, Isaiah, the 3rd chapter. I'm going to read verse 12 through 24. My people, youths, exert pressure on them, and women rule over them. And women rule over them. Abba is speaking this through his servant Yeshayahu to speak to disorder. To speak to this order. See, you see, this is disorder. Women are not to rule over men. Men are to rule over women. Rule over women until we both go back to the ground. My people, youths exert pressure over them, and women rule over them. O my people, your leaders lead you astray and swallow the way of your past. Yahuwah shall stand up to plead, and is standing to judge the peoples. Yahuwah enters into judgment with the elders of his people and its heads. It is you who have eaten up the vineyard. The plunder of the poor is in your house. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the faces of the poor? Declares the Master Yahuwah of hosts. And Yahuwah says, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with outstretched necks and seductive eyes, walking and menacing as they go, making a jingling with their feet. Therefore Yahuwah shall smite a scab to the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and Yahuwah expose their nakedness, and Yahuwah expose their shame. You see, this is what happened when women operate out of order. When you operate out of order, you're still naked. Your nakedness is not covered. It's not covered. When you operate out of order, you are naked. You are exposed. You are out of order, and you are naked. He says here that he's going to cause a scab on the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion. We see this an epidemic going around with people wearing weaves in their heads and going balls and scabs forming in their head because they're hardy. Because they're hardy. Talking about they don't need a man. Talking about they can take care of themselves. They don't need a man. You know, this feminist movement with this Aizabal root going rampant in the earth. Going rampant in the earth. Women operating out of order. Women in secular positions ruling over men. Operating out of order. Thinking that this is the way that things are supposed to be. And so now they are operating in that perverse root of that feminist root, that Aizabal root. And you're naked. You're naked because you're operating out of order. You're operating out of order. Your nakedness, and Yahuwah is going to expose your nakedness. He is going to expose your nakedness because you're operating out of order. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. He is going to expose your nakedness. Indeed, you are naked because you are out of order. In that day, Yahuwah takes away the finery of the anklets. So he's going to take away all your jewelry, all your fine jewelry, and the headbands, and the crescents, and the pendants. Oh, he's going to take away all your fine jewelry and strip you naked. The bracelets and the veils and the headdresses and the leg ornaments and the sashes and the perfume bottles and the amulets, the rings and the nose jewels and the costly robes and the cloaks and the shawls. He's going to strip you naked. He's going to strip you naked until you align with order, until you align with the judgment. He's going to strip you naked. Oh, some of you are successful in accordance with the world's riches. But hear me, if one turns his ear from hearing the Torah, even his prayer is an abomination. What I'll be speaking to you is Torah, is right ruling. And so if all those things, all those successes that you have, you think that came from Abba, do you really think that came from Abba when you are operating contrary to Torah, out of order? Nay. Hashatan also gives gifts to those who bow down before him. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Even to men who are allowing women to take care of them, who are aligning themselves with the judgment. And you have the riches of this world, and you think that it came from Yahuwah. No, think again. Hashatan also gives riches to those who bow down before him. Your prayer is an abomination if you don't align yourself with right ruling. If you don't align yourself with right ruling, and if you're not aligning yourself with the very first judgment pronounced on the earth, that man will rule over woman and woman is to submit to him, and this is to be in place until Shamayim and Aratz passes away, you need to reconsider. You need to reconsider where that stuff is coming from. If you're some big CEO or have some position on your job where you are ruling over men, you need to reconsider. Yes, you do. Yes, you do, because you're out of order, and Yahuwah is going to strip you naked. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And the turbans and the large veils, and it shall be, instead of a sweet fragrance, a smell of decay, and instead of a belt, a rope, and instead of a well-set hair, baldness, and instead of a festal robe, a girding of sackcloth, and branding instead of loveliness. and branding instead of loveliness. You better check yourself. You better check yourself. If you're out of order, you need to get in order. You need to get in order. You need to get in order. Barak Yahuwah. 1 Peter, the 3rd chapter, verse 1 through 7. 1 Peter, Kafa Allah, 1 Peter, the 3rd chapter, verse 1 through 7. And the same way, wives, be subject to your own husbands. Again, this is the judgment. Genesis 3:16. This is the judgment. Be subject to your own husbands, so that if any are disobedient to the word, that they without a word might be won by the behavior of their wives. Having seen your blameless behavior in reverence, your adornment should not be outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on dresses, but the hidden man of the heart with the incorruptible ornament of a meek and quiet spirit. Of a meek and quiet spirit. This is the spirit, the root that a daughter of Zion is supposed to operate in. This is the root that a daughter of Zion is supposed to operate in. Now, this is not for the heathen. This is not for the Gentiles. The Gentiles don't operate in this root. The Gentile women are hardy. They don't mind ruling over men. They try to rule over their husbands and over their households. They won't submit to their husbands. They won't submit to authority. But a daughter of Zion, is supposed to have here with the incorruptible ornament of a meek and quiet rook. A meek and quiet rook. This is what she is to adorn herself in. She is to submit. She is to submit to the judgment of Genesis 3:16. And she is to have a meek and quiet rook, which is of great value before Elohim. She is to submit to covering so that her nakedness and so that her shame is covered, which is of great value before Elohim. A meek and quiet spirit is of great value before Elohim. For in this way, in former times, the Kadush women who trusted in Elohim also adorned themselves, being subject to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him master, of whom you became children, doing good, not frightened by any fear. Indeed, she called him master. Do we not call Yahusha master? Yes, we do. Why? Because he's our husband, because he's our master. Moreover, we call him master because he owns us, because he purchased us. A man purchases a woman with a bride's price. Thus, he becomes a master. Yes, he does. Thus, she becomes his servant. Thus, she is to submit to him. Thus, she calls him Adonai. She calls him master. And she is to have a meek and quiet spirit, and she is to submit to him. And as Sarah called Abraham master, she should call him Adonai. She should call him master. In the same way, husbands live understandingly. Listen. In the same way, husbands live understandingly together, giving respect to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the favor of life, so that your prayers are not hindered. In the same way, husbands live understandingly together, giving respect to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the favor of life, so that your prayers are not hindered. So that they are not hindered. And so the woman is to have her nakedness covered. Husband is to cover the shame of his wife. He is to cover the shame of his wife. He is to cover her nakedness. Nakedness is crime. What crime? The crime of Kua. The crime of Kua. The man is to cover the shame of the Aisha. Yahusha covers the shame of man. He covers our shame. He covers our crime. Man, in turn, covers the crime, covers the shame of woman. Nakedness, again, is crime. It is shame. Thus, Yahuwah slew 2 lambs and covered Adam and Kua's crime. Shame, their nakedness. It is written in the book of Yobelim, again, we spoke about this in the first video, that the nations show their shame or their nakedness or their crime. It is not so in Yasha'al, because we have the Torah. Because we have the Torah. We have the Torah. And so men are to live understandingly with the wife as the weaker vessel. And so we are to love them as our own flesh. We are to love them as our own flesh. We are not to rule over them harshly. We are to have in the forefront of our minds, as was spoken in the first video that we were created to be co-equal. She was our Azar Nagab. She was our helper, our counterpart to co-equally rule the earth. But because of the fall, because Kua partook of the fruit, and there was then a separation, now man is to rule over woman. He is to cover her shame. He is to cover her nakedness, the nakedness of Kua, the crime of Kua. And as he loves her as his own flesh, as he loves her to life, as he loves her as his own flesh, then the shame of her crime is covered. And she does not feel ashamed. She does not even feel ashamed to submit to him, because he loves her as he loves his own flesh. As his own flesh, he loves her. Indeed, love covers a multitude of crime. And so loving her from this place, she does not mind submitting to him. And thus her crime, her shame is covered. Her shame is covered. Her crime is covered. Indeed, love covers a multitude of crime. And in doing so, man, in loving her this way, your prayers are not hindered. Your prayers are not hindered, because you are to remember that she will be a co-heir again one day. We are being restored in the renewal of all things to be co-heirs and to be co-equal again. And to be co-equal again when there is a new Araz and a new Shamayim. When there is a new Araz and a new Shamayim. And so women, you are to submit. You're not to teach men. You're not to rule over men. You're not to be bosses over men. You are to submit. You are to submit. Indeed, in Yeshayahu, what I just read here, Yeshayahu, the 3rd chapter, a warning has been given to haughty women. A warning has been given to haughty women. Another warning is given here to haughty women in Revelation, the 2nd chapter, verse 20 through 23. It reads here, "But I hold against you that you allow that woman Aizabal, who calls herself a prophetess, to what? To teach and lead my servants astray, to commit whoring, and to eat food offered to idols. And I gave her time to repent of her whoring, and she did not repent. See, I am throwing unto a sick bed, and those who commit adultery with her into great affliction, unless they repent of their works. And I shall slay her children with death." He speaks the same thing in Yeshayahu, the 16th chapter. "And all the assembly shall know that I am the one searching the kidneys and hearts, and I shall give to each one of you according to your works." I shall give according to you, each of you, according to your works. And so we are to submit to order. We are to submit to order. The very order that was ordained in the very beginning and established in the very beginning because of the fall. That is a judgment. That is a judgment. And unless we align ourselves with that judgment, we are out of order and we are naked. We are naked, and we are at risk of not inheriting eternal life. And we are at risk of not inheriting eternal life. We must submit. We must submit to this order. We must submit to this order. Indeed, indeed. Do not give your strength to women, or your ways to which destroy sovereigns. Do not give your strength to women, or your ways that which destroys sovereign. Men must be men. Women must be women. Proverbs 31:3. Do not give your strength to women, or your ways that which destroys sovereign. Abba expects us to be men, and Abba expects women to be women. He has no patience for effeminate men, as it reads in the Bashura, in the Barik Kadashah, that all who are effeminate are going to have their place in the lake of fire. All who refuse to be men and operate as men are going to have their place in the lake of fire. All who refuse to be women and operate as women. We saw what's going to happen to those who operate in this Ayizabal root. They're going to be destroyed. Yes, they are. They're going to be destroyed. We must operate in our roles. Women, you must submit. This is the judgment. This is the judgment. You must have a covering to cover your nakedness, to cover your crime. You must be covered cradle to grave. Proverbs 31:3. Do not give your strength, Khalil, to women, or your ways to that which destroys sovereigns. What does Khalil mean? The Abait Khalil mean? It means strength, efficiency, wealth, army. Strength, efficiency, wealth, army. Let's break the letters down, the Abait letters down, because each Abait letter has a meaning of its own. And when we put them together, we get a better context of what Khalil means. The Abait word Khalil is comprised of the letters Kot, Yod, and Lamed. Kot, Yod, and Lamed. Abait letters are represented by symbols to relay the intent of words and phrases when placed together. For example, Kot is represented by a fence. Yod is represented by a hand. And Lamed is represented by a staff or gold. It also means to teach. It also means to teach. Yes, it does. Lamed also means to teach. And so placed together, we understand that Khalil means to shepherd or lead, as it is used in the sense of strength. The staff is a shepherd's staff, in which the hand of a man grabs to keep the sheep within the enclosure of the fence. This duty, and it also means to teach, this duty cannot be given to a woman. It cannot be given to a woman. It cannot be given to a woman. We see a witness of it here. Women are to submit. You are to submit and have a meek and quiet spirit if you are a daughter of Zion. If you are a daughter of Zion, you are to have a meek and quiet spirit and not be calling yourself pastor or bishop or apostle or being somewhere teaching men. You're out of order. You're out of order. And Yahuwah is going to strip you naked. If you're listening to this teaching under the sound of my voice, he's going to strip you naked because you're out of order. But we have a witness of this here in 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, verses 2 through 5. An overseer, a shepherd, an elder, then shall be blameless, the husband of one wife. The husband of one wife. This does not say a woman. The husband, not the wife of one husband, the husband of one wife. Sober, sensible, orderly, kind to strangers, able to teach, not given to wine, no brawler, but gentle, not quarrelsome, no lover of silver, one who rules his own house well, having his children in subjection with all reverence. For if a man, operative word is man, for if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how shall he look after the assembly of Elohim? After the assembly of Elohim. Let's look at the Greek word for overseer. It is the Greek word episkopos. Episkopos. And it means here a man charged with the duty of seeing that things be done by others are done rightly. And a curator, guardian, or superintendent. A man charged with the duty of seeing that things be done by others are done rightly, and a curator, guardian, or superintendent. This is not so-called male chauvinism. This is right ruling. Yahuwah is an Elohim of order. He does not give his position away. He expects men who represent him, who are made in his image, to not give theirs away. Likewise, women are to teach us how to submit. Likewise, women are to teach us how to submit and to serve our East husband as they humbly submit. So when a woman humbly submits to her husband with a meek and quiet spirit, this is an awesome responsibility, because by this example, she is in turn teaching her husband how to submit to Yahusha. And how also to have a meek and quiet spirit. Because listen, don't get it twisted. Only the meek are going to inherit. Only the meek are going to inherit. And so as woman submits and men submit, we are being delivered. We are being delivered. And so the Aisha, when man observes her humbly submitting and serving, she is teaching her Aish how to humbly submit. This is order. This is order. And at the end of days, in the last great day, we will all have the same Aish. And there will no longer be any marriage or giving away in marriage when we move into eternity, into the 8,000th year. In the meantime, we all have roles that we must respect. There must be order. Woman must have a covering. Your nakedness must be covered. Your shame must be covered. Women must have a covering. They must submit to coverings. You must submit to coverings. This is order. This is order. Likewise, men must lead. Men must lead. The singers in the Haiko were all men. These were sons of Karak. They were all men. Men must lead in song. Men must lead in prayer. Men must lead in reading. Men must lead in teaching. The assembly, men must lead. Order must be established in the house of Yasha'al. Order must be established. We must be men and we must lead. Nevertheless, if women do not submit, no covering has to be provided for them. And no support has to be provided for them. That's the same applies to Yahuwah. If we don't submit to him, he is not our husband. He is not our husband. And a husband is to provide three things to a woman: food, clothing, and marital rights. And so if a woman does not submit, then a husband does not have to provide this thing plus shelter. But if a woman is submitting and a husband is not providing these things, then she is to be let go for free. She is to go without silver. She is to go for free. And so we both must operate in our respective roles. We both must operate in our respective roles. As it reads here in Exodus, the 21st chapter, and I'm going to read verse 7 through 11. And when a man sells his daughter to be a female servant, she does not go out as the male servants do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who has engaged her to himself, then he shall let her be ransomed. He shall have no authority to sell her to a foreign people because of him deceiving her. And if he has engaged her to his son, he is to do to her as the right of daughters. If he takes another wife, her food, her covering, to cover her shame, to cover her nakedness. A man is to cover her shame. It's to cover her nakedness. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Just like our husband covers our shame. We are to cover her nakedness. We are to cover her shame. Covering here is clothing. And so we are to cover her. We are to cover her shame. This is the job of a husband. Her food, her covering, and her marital rights are not to be diminished. And if she does not do these three for her, and if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out for naught without silver. Without silver. Let me look at the time, Barak Yahuwah. Let me look at Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 through 4, because I want to point out something else here to you. Dabarim 24, verses 1 through 4. When a man takes a wife and shall marry her, then it shall be, if she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found a matter of uncoveredness in her, a matter of nakedness in her, a matter of uncleanness in her, a matter of crime, a matter of nakedness, a matter of uncoveredness, a matter of uncleanness in her. And he shall write her a certificate of divorce, because now she's naked. He ain't got to provide no clothes for her because she has shown herself to be naked. She has shown herself to have some form of nakedness in her, some form of crime. And he shall write a certificate of divorce and put it in her hand and send her out of his house. And if she, and put it in her hand and send her out of his house. And if she left his house and went and became another man's wife, indeed, a woman is to be covered cradle to grave. If she's divorced, she can go and marry again. What Yahusha is speaking of in the Bashora, the good news, is the putting away. The putting away is different from marriage. It's different from divorce, rather. Divorce is the Abraite word karitu, And to send away is shalak. The putting away is shalak. Two different things. It's a two-step process. He is to give her a certificate of divorce, a karitu, and then shalak, send her away, put her away. But during the time of the Pharisees, they were simply putting the wives away and not giving them a certificate of divorce, thus preventing them from remarrying, thus preventing them from being covered, thus preventing them from being covered. And this was cruel. This was cruel because a woman is designed to be covered from cradle to grave, from cradle to grave. And if she left his house and went and became another man's wife, and a latter husband shall hate her, and write her a certificate of divorce, and put it in her hand, and send her out of his house, or when a latter husband dies who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that would be an abomination before Yahuwah. And do not bring crime on the land which Yahuwah your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance. As an inheritance. And so she can't return back to her former husband for her first husband. But if her latter husband dies, she can go and marry again. She can go and marry again. She just can't return to the first husband because she is to be covered. She is to be covered from cradle to grave. Remember the woman at the well who had 7 husbands. Who had 7 husbands. Yes, a woman can remarry. I don't care what the Christian church say because of their misunderstanding of Torah, because of their ignorance of Torah. A woman can remarry because she is to be covered from cradle to grave. She is to be covered from cradle to grave. Barak Yahuwah. Barak Yahuwah. 2 Thessalonians, and we're getting ready to shut this down. 2 Thessalonians, the 3rd chapter. I'm going to read verse 6 through 15. But we command you, brothers, in the name of our Master Yahushua Mashiach, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly. Disorderly. Remember, Torah is order. Torah is order. We began this in the very first video, describing or explaining how Torah is order and how lawlessness or Torahlessness is disorder. Is disorder. Reading here, listen. That you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly, or in other words, not in accordance with Torah, and not according to the tradition which you receive from us. For you yourselves know how you ought to imitate us. For we were not disorderly among you. We were not Torahless among you. Nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But worked with labor, toil night and day, in order not to burden any of you. Not because we do not have authority, but to make ourselves an example, for you to imitate us. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone does not wish to work, neither let him eat. Neither let him eat. If they don't work, this is disorder. This is disobedience to Torah in accordance with Genesis 3, verses 17 through 19. A man is to work until he returns to the soil. And so this is disorderly. This is Torahlessness here. This is Torahlessness. And so if a man don't work, he shall not eat. He shall not eat. And so Shaul is speaking about Torah here. He's speaking about Torah. He's speaking about roles. He spoke about the role of women up above, and now he's speaking about the role of men. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone does not wish to work, neither let him eat. For we hear of some among you walking disorderly, not working at all. Disorderly again. In the first video, it was explained that disorder is Torahlessness, and order is Torah, obedience to Torah. It's obedience to Torah. Order is righteousness. Disorder is unrighteousness. Barak Yahuwah. Not working at all, but are busybodies. But we command and urge such through our Master Yahushua Mashiach to settle down, work and eat their own bread. And you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good. And if anyone does not obey your word, does not obey our word in this letter, note that one, and do not keep company with him, so that he is put to shame, so that his nakedness is exposed. So that his nakedness is exposed. Shame is nakedness. So that he is put to shame. However, do not regard him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. As a brother. Barak Yahuwah. Barak Yahuwah. And so much paka. We must. Actually, I'm going to read one more precept and then we're going to shut this down. I'm going to read one more precept and we're going to shut this down. Deuteronomy, the 15th chapter, verse 12 through 18. Deuteronomy, the 15th chapter, verse 12 through 18. When your brother is sold to you, an Abari man is an Abari or an Abari woman, and shall serve you 6 years. Then let him go free from you in the 7th year. Then you send him away free from you. Let him not go away empty-handed. And so here, in other texts and other precepts, this is a hired servant. This is a hired servant. A man is to work. A man is to work. And so if he has to sell himself to his brother as a hired servant, he is to work. His food ain't free. His food isn't free. A man is to work. This is right ruling. This is right ruling in accordance with the judgment. He is to work. He is to work. And when you send him away free from you, let him not go away empty-handed. You shall richly supply him from your flock and from your threshing floor and from your winepress, with that which Yahuwah has baruch you with. Give to him. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Mashraim, and Yahuwah your Elohim ransomed you. Therefore I am commanding you this word today. And it shall be, when he says to you, I do not go away from you, because he loves you and your house, because it is good for him with you, then you shall take an awl and thrust it through his ear to the door, and he shall be your servant forever. Do the same to your female servant. Let it not be hard in your eyes when you send him away free from you, for he has been worth a double hired servant and serving you in 6 years. And Yahuwah your Elohim shall barak you in all. Shall barak you in all that you do. Shall barak you in all that you do. And so much paka, Yahuwah sent me by to reestablish order in the house of Yasha'al. He sent me by to reestablish order. And we must embrace this truth in meekness, humility, and love. Men are not to rule harshly over his Aisha, but rather loving her as his own flesh, protecting her, providing for her, being tender towards her, being tender-hearted towards her, recognizing that she is the weaker vessel, recognizing that one day we will be co-heirs again, so that our prayers are not hindered. We must embrace our roles. We must embrace our roles in meekness and humility. Aisha, submitting to Aish. Aish, operating in your role as provider and protector and coverer. We must, with meekness and humility, accept these roles. Our salvation depends on this, because this is a judgment. It is the very first judgment. And we must comply with the judgment. We must comply with this judgment. Even single women must submit themselves to the leadership of man. This is the decree. This is right ruling. This is right ruling. I pray that this teaching has been a barakah to you. I pray that it has opened some eyes. I pray that it even pricked some who are operating disorderly. I pray that now, even now, that if you've listened to these videos, that you would even now align yourselves with the proper order, that you would align yourselves with judgment. The judgment that was decreed in the garden and that is going to be in place until the Shamaim and Araz passes away. Until the Shamaim and Araz passes away. Our very salvation depends on aligning ourselves with this decree. Barak Yahuwah. Barak Yahuwah. Stretch out your hands to receive, Maspaka. Stretch out your hands to receive. Yahuwah barak you and guard you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and show favor to you. Yahuwah lift up his face upon you and give you shalom. Thus you shall put my name on the children of Yasha'al, and I myself shall barak them. So be it, so be it, so be it. Shalom.